This is the first episode in the Generation O Long-Term Outcomes series. We define Generation O as babies born with prenatal opioid exposure during the ongoing opioid epidemic. I'm Lenette Serlo, your scientific journal translator. By reading the science behind the latest findings regarding Generation O, I can explain to you in plain English what these studies have to say about the children we are raising, teaching, and seeing in our practices. Discussion around the opioid epidemic has shown us how widespread the problem is in America, but we haven't heard enough about the children who suffered from opioid use before they were born, or about the long-term outcomes that may have been caused by this exposure. I am passionate about raising the profile of children exposed in utero to opioids and to other substances. And your attention to this video helps raise the voices of Generation O. So let's jump right in. The title of today's scientific journal article is Neonatal Abstinence Syndrome and High School Performance. It was published in February of 2017, which was about 6 years ago, in the Journal of Pediatrics. And the lead researcher was Julie Oai. He was the lead researcher on a pretty large team. This was a big data set that they studied. And little is known about the long-term outcomes of children with a neonatal abstinence syndrome diagnosis, including how they perform in school. So in this study, the researchers took health data for all children born in the state of New South Wales, which is in Australia. And they took the data from the years 2000 to 2006. And they linked this health data with school test records data. And so they were able to track the two together. And the study included 2,234 children who had neonatal abstinence syndrome diagnoses at birth. So that's over 2,000 NAS children in the study. They also took the group of NAS kids and they matched them with another group who had the same gestation, meaning that they were in the womb the same amount of time, because we know many of the NAS babies are born prematurely. They took babies with the same socioeconomic status, the same gender, and they matched them with the babies that had NAS. So these two groups were equal in those items, but one group had NAS, those were about 2,000 kids, and then the group without NAS but with the same other matching items was about 4,000 kids. And then the rest of the children born in the state during those years was about 600,000 more kids. So their whole study size was the 600,000 kids plus the 2,000 NAS kids plus the 4,000 of the control group. So what they found out is, let me backtrack. So for the testing, they looked at Australia's national reading and math tests, which in Australia, they take in 3rd grade, 5th grade, 7th grade. They take it again in 9th grade, but for this study, they only looked at the 3rd, 5th, and 7th grade testing scores. And there were testing in math and testing in literacy. The literacy tests included reading, writing, spelling, grammar, punctuation. So what were the results when they compared all these data sets? The results showed that the scores for the NAS group were significantly lower in 3rd grade. So at the first stage of testing in the 3rd grade, the kids are 8 or 9 years old. They're given a number out of 100. The NAS kids scored 359. The control group scored 410. The rest of the population scored 421. So you can see that through the first set of tests as early as the 3rd grade, the kids with NAS are already showing a significantly lower test score than either the control group or the rest of the population. And what's even worse is that as these kids grew into 5th grade, 7th grade, and were tested again, the difference between the scores of the NAS kids and the scores of the control group and the rest of the population, the difference just got bigger and bigger and bigger as they aged. It was a progressive difference. By the time that the NAS kids got into 7th grade, their test scores were lower than the control group and the population in 5th grade. So let me say that in a different way. The NAS 7th graders were getting scores that looked like what 5th graders would get. So again, they're losing more ground each year. Some of the conclusions that they came up with in this study, and by the way, there's a link in the comments of the study itself so that you can look at the numbers and the graphs and everything on your own. But this will just give you an overview, and sometimes those numbers and data can be a little hard to read, so hopefully this is helpful. So one of the conclusions was that a diagnoses of NAS at birth is strongly associated with poor and deteriorating school performance. They also noted that children with NAS and their families must be identified early and provided with support so that they can minimize the consequences of poor educational outcomes, because school performance is one of the most important outcomes of childhood, and the ability to do well in school is consistently related throughout all of the globe to adult success. Learning problems may not be recognized until a child enters school, but when they are recognized, there are simple and low-cost strategies that can really benefit these kids. A little bit more about the test scores. The children with NAS had significantly lower scores than either the control group or the population at large in every grade, in every domain of testing. So both the literacy and the math scores were lower in each grade every time they looked at it. And by 7th grade, 38% of the NAS kids did not meet the minimum requirement in at least one of the areas to move on to their next grade. In comparison to the other groups, the control group, when they were in 7th grade, 18% of them were not allowed to move on to the next grade because of poor performance on the test. So 38% of the NAS kids didn't meet the minimum requirements, where only 18% of the control group and 15% of the larger population did not meet those minimum requirements. Why is this an important report? Well, it was the first report to measure the academic outcomes at a population level for children with an NAS diagnosis. And as mentioned, the results show that a diagnosis of NAS is associated with poor performance in standardized testing from as early as 3rd grade. Now, this does not prove that the NAS diagnosis is what caused the low school performance. It's just showing that there's an association. You can see how strong the association is. And in my view, that's still important information. School failure is a great concern because it increases the risk of poor adult outcomes, including depression in women, criminal activity, and drug use. So we all want our kids to do well in school, but not doing well makes life even harder in other areas as well. So what can we do? Well, we must take advantage of the fact that many children receive this diagnosis at birth. Other types of learning difficulties, other types of problems that kids go through are not identified at birth. So when we know that a child is identified at birth with NAS, and we know that there is a probability that poor school outcomes can happen, we can intervene right away. So we need to use this information that we get at birth to provide interventions for the child and for the family as early as possible, because they're more effective the earlier they're started. This report was done on kids in Australia because unfortunately for them, the opioid crisis hit them before it hit us. But now that we have experienced our own and are experiencing our own opioid epidemic, we should be able to generate numbers to see how they compare with the Australian kids as early as next year. So stay tuned for that. Thank you for listening to this report. I will bring you another one soon on this series, and we'll take another look at the long-term outcomes associated with neonatal abstinence syndrome. Bye.